Hello everyone, I hope we're all well and happy. Okay, now this is the first lesson on the new topic, which is called relationships between the institutions. If you look in the booklet which I sent to you, on the first page, after the first one with the pictures on, it's got the exam specification. So it's got some key terminology on here: Supreme Court, judicial neutrality, independence, review, elected dictatorship, EU, four freedoms, legal sovereignty, political sovereignty, and ultra vires. Okay, on the right hand side it's actually got the specification. Now some of it we've already done. So 4.1 on the Supreme Court we haven't done, so we'll be doing that. 4.2, the relationship between the executive and Parliament. We actually did that when we did about Parliament. That's all that stuff about the changing relationship between the executive and Parliament, you know, how some parliaments are weaker at controlling the executive than others. The measures by which the executive have control over the legislature, i.e. Parliament, all that kind of stuff. So that should all be fine. 4.3 is on the European Union and its relationship with UK government, which obviously we haven't done yet. And then the final bit's on the location of sovereignty in the UK political system. That bit's almost like a nod on a sub bit, which they couldn't think where to put, so they shoved it in this section. Okay, so maybe the computer's saying it's running out of battery. So, what we're going to look at today then, or the next probably about a week, is the judiciary. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, what do judges have to do with politics? Don't judges just say, Brad, you're guilty of nicking apples from Sainsbury's, therefore you have a 10-year imprisonment, see you later. Okay, well, the judiciary are the third branch of government. They do play a role in government and controlling governments. We've already met the judiciary and did about civil liberties back around Christmas time, and about how the judiciary are involved in protecting citizens' rights and citizens' relationship between them and the state. Now, what we're looking at in particular here is going to be the Supreme Court and its relationship with the executive, i.e. the decision makers, and Parliament. And I suppose some of the questions you like to get on the Supreme Court are on the lines of, is the Supreme Court too influential? Should an unelected branch have such powers? That type of stuff. So, to begin with, what I want you to do is, in your booklet, the first 3 or 4 pages, I've got the heading, what is the role and composition of the Supreme Court? And so you've got question 1, when and why was it created? Question 2, where does the Supreme Court sit in the UK legal system? It goes on about the types of cases the Supreme Court hears. You then got some examples where you've got to find out a little bit about. You then got question 5 of how to get onto the Supreme Court. Question 6 is about meet the judges. So who is the current president of the Supreme Court? Actually, I should have changed that picture on the booklet because it's changed since. Oh, never mind. What is the average age of the current members of the court, etc., etc. Now, to do this, there's a PowerPoint called Supreme Court Introduction, which I've done, which basically has the answers to most of these questions on. So you basically need to use that PowerPoint to complete most of these answers. Things like the average age of the judges, there's a table which has the ages on, so you've got to work out the average, a little bit of maths there for you. Okay, so I want to use that PowerPoint to complete all those questions. And that should give you an idea about the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court was only created by the 2005 Constitutional Reform Act. Before that date, the Supreme Court was actually called the Appellate Committee of the House of Lords, and it was a committee inside the House of Lords. The Blair government decided it'd be better for democracy to separate out the judiciary, the unelected branch, with the legislature, Parliament. Okay? Also, it means that the judges can be completely independent from politics, because what judges are supposed to do is implement the law, not make the law. So Parliament and the executive make the law. The judiciary's job is basically to implement the law. So the law says you get 10 years imprisonment for nicking apples from Sainsbury's. Brad nicks some apples from Sainsbury's. Therefore, the judges implement the law and say, you're locked up, matey, for 10 years. Cheerio. Okay. Now, in reality, judges have a bigger role to play because sometimes Parliament might pass laws which goes against their previous laws, and judges have got to kind of decide where the law really sits in those situations. Also, Parliament, to be honest, often passes laws which are quite vague and wishy-washy, rather like your essays. And judges have to then interpret it. What did Parliament mean by this law? Now, I've got this person in front of me. I've got this particular case which I'm looking at. I've got this law which is a little bit vague. What did Parliament mean? So judges actually do have quite a lot of influence, a lot of power in interpreting the law. Now, there's two really important principles regarding the judiciary. One of them is called judicial independence, and one is judicial neutrality. They're two really important principles of the judiciary. You need to know what these two principles mean and how are they maintained. Now, to do that, the Lynch textbook is probably the best one for this. If you look in the Lynch textbook, on the page in your booklet about judicial independence, if you look at page 165 of the Lynch book, actually no, I think that's a neutrality, 163 and 164, sorry, of the Lynch book is all about judicial independence and how is it maintained. And then judicial neutrality, that's on page 165 of the Lynch book. There's also bits in them from the Jenkins book as well and the EdXL book, so use all three, but the Lynch book is particularly quite good on these parts. So if you could do those, and then finally, well, no, not quite finally, there's then this little bit called, to what extent is the judiciary independent and neutral? In other words, how independent is our judiciary? How neutral is our judiciary? And again, there's a table in the Lynch book on page 164. Use that and use what you've read to do the argument to say, yeah, it is independent and actually it's a bit dodgy on this issue. Okay, so if you could do all that, that'd be grand. And then your homework is the next page. There's again another important concept called judicial review. Okay, what I'd like you to do is, using the Lynch book on 166 and 168, is to complete the questions about judicial review. What it means, have a think about how it might affect parliamentary sovereignty, why might the number of cases have increased, because there's been a big increase in the number of judicial review cases in the last 30-40 years, and then finally this last part on ultra vires, a little bit of Latin for you. Okay, again, it's in the Lynch book. What does it mean? And there's an example of the case here, Riley versus Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. And it tells you where it is in the textbook to find out what that case was and how and why that shows ultra vires. So by the time you've done this work, plus your homework, you should know what is meant by judicial neutrality, what is meant by judicial independence, how are those two concepts threatened. You should know about judicial review and why it's increased, ultra vires, and you should also know the position of the Supreme Court in the UK judiciary system. So I think that's probably just about enough to keep you going, I would have thought. So if you could do that for next week, Monday, Tuesday, I'll then upload the next video. It's going dark. I'll then upload the next video, which will then look at the Supreme Court. There's a little video we're going to watch, you're going to watch, and some work on the Supreme Court. Okay, right, I'll speak to you next week.